Let me ask you a question, actually, because we decided to do this literally 5 minutes ago. Do you have an opening question you'd like me to ask you? Because if not, I have plenty.
You know, I've had a lot of time to think about this interview, and what's funny is this interview, the context of it has changed greatly.
Hmm.
Um, what I'm doing with my time vocationally has sort of eaten the totality of my life. And so, um, likewise with what's going on with your channel, um, you're now sort of you're talking to people about their jobs, right? Their vocations, their skills, their hobbies, their passions. So I sort of thought, hey, dude, what would be beneficial for me if I'm 15, 18, 20 something, and I'm thinking, hey, I'm a good songwriter, or at least I've got the beginning of what I've got the beginnings of what could be extremely usable chops.
Hmm.
What do I do to make a living on this? Is there a such thing? Look, I'm a dude who lives in the shadows. That's the job. The job of professional working songwriter. The job is to live in the shadows. You accept right out of the gate that it sounds depressing, but it's not that. We'll get to the romantic notions of it in a second, but it sounds like, look, you make this I don't know if it's a Faustian agreement, but you do make an agreement that you are not the center of attention, and you probably won't be the person who's well regarded in the comment sections and the show and the reviews and the whatnot, um, that's labeled genius. You
Now let
also
me let me just stop you right there. Can you very simply just describe what your job is, or maybe that?
No, but I've been asked enough that I have a workaround answer.
Okay.
The job is working songwriter. That's the job, right? And the distinction is to say that doesn't mean that I wait tables on the side and attempt to write the great American novel and aspire to do the thing, right? I'm not disparaging anybody who does, by the way, and that's not just padding, because all of us are going to be in that weird transitional phase. You're going to be at that place. You are going to wait tables and you while you aspire to go to the next, whatever the case might be. I just didn't. And so my entire life has been devoted to the thing. I do the thing, right? And that thing is to be a working songwriter. Now, in today's environment, the reason why it's such a weird question, you should just be able to say, I'm a songwriter. That makes sense, right? But it doesn't. It elicits all these negative ideas in your mind. You go, oh, are you? And immediately you cut to me in a cubicle someplace, like not really writing songs, but I think I'm a songwriter or something like this, right? But by today's metrics, um, that means musician, producer, vocalist, arranger, composer. It's all of these things. All of these expectations are now placed on that. By the way, those are professional, long-standing, extremely difficult, well-earned and worked for jobs that I just mentioned, right? I mean, like where a true professional spends 20 years incubating the knowledge to be able to do it and spends 30 years professionally doing it. So all of these things now are expected of the quote unquote working songwriter, of which maybe 0.2% of the population of the world could say that they are or something. It's very small, but it can be done. So that relates back to the beginning question that you asked me, like what's the first thing we should be talking about? And I think, look, my biography matters very little. I'm the dude in the shadows, and that's the agreement, right? The romantic notion of that, it's like I'm the dude at the coffee shop sitting and observing people, and I'm trying to harness the power of the human condition and throw them into lyrics that are edible enough for anybody to take a bite. It's
Mhm.
that it's that kind of thing, right? But that's the job.
So you play the instruments, you write the lyrics, you create the narrative hook or whatever you might want to call it. You do the production, you do the editing, um, and you do this for yourself, for others, for a combination.
Well, that innocent question is about the most loaded question
Okay.
in what will be your journey as a as a working artist. Okay, we'll banner it under the humanities and what we'll call artistry. Okay, the question that you'll suffer from for your entire life will be whether or not you're working for you or you're working, right? And those are the parameters. Um, and I think that it's an erroneous notion to suggest that working is not working for you. And I don't think that historically we have any evidence that would suggest that that's true. In fact, I think all of the evidence would point to the masters of all art are essentially people who are working on behalf of clients to then infuse their understanding of the human condition into a work, right? And that's what becomes iconic. What we're talking about is the guardrails of work. But my job is to interface with people on the way up, people on the way down, people sometimes in the middle of their artistry journey. It can be record firms, artists, production firms. It can be production firms meaning music, film, television, whatnot. Lots of
Mm.
content creators, lots of people that need music for one point or the next. But primarily, I specialize in artist relationships, people who are looking to take the sound that lives in their head and then project it into reality, and who are asking questions about whether or not there's a market for it, right? And then sometimes established artists who already have a sound, so then you have to take into consideration things like what does their body of work sound like, what is their audience accustomed to, things like this. A lot of it's research, a lot of it's data, right? Being able to formulaically break down that data to then process it and push it far enough that it's different and new. The answer to your question is there is no difference between working for yourself and working for the client, but you're not going to be paid as a working songwriter. The songwriter's jobs, it doesn't matter what level of the music industry that you're at, by the way. Essentially, the songwriter's job is to work with the client through the client, right? So there's the with where you have to understand enough about the history of songwriting, the formulas of songwriting, the mathematics involved in music to be able to understand the client that you're working with and the task that you're being asked to do, and whether or not it should be the task, whether or not you have to sort of mutate that task. And then
Mm.
you have to understand enough about yourself to know what works and what doesn't work, and then push that client into another place, right? Hopefully, anything that I just said makes sense because I'm on fire to talk about the process. I think the process is
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, I think a lot of people who first think about songwriting, the word client doesn't come into their head immediately. But for you, it's, at the tip of your tongue. So can you give me an example of maybe nothing too current, because maybe you're not allowed to talk about that, but maybe just a client that you had recently without naming names, or a task that you had recently, and what that process might look like.
So we'll call them some folks from CBS,
Hmm.
and a branch of CBS, CBS Sports, which was a both a cable channel, maybe one of these offshoot cable channels, and an online hub. Um, they came to me for this live hybrid show that they had. So they'd been airing this television show. This is a long-winded answer to get to what you're doing, but they'd been airing this live feed from an auction, a car auction. And it was going real well. Like people, there's a whole community of people, millions, that love this stuff, right? And so seeing like the auctioneer and the people involved, they thought, this is crazy, this world that these people are up to antics. They're all theatrical. Like this is wild. Like there's, these obscenely rich and well-to-do people who are very eccentric, like throwing money
Yeah.
around and stuff. So they said, let's make a show of this. And, you know, uh, obviously that plays like a reality thing. They came to me with here was the brief. We need an Eagles sounding song that is infused with AC/DC tendencies. And my answer to that was nope, no, you don't. No, you don't. You don't want that. I cut them honestly. I said, listen, at the risk of you guys going to somebody else, which is fine, that happens. You do not want that. You need to understand what market you're talking to and talk to them. That's what you need to do, right? Your instinct to talk to people who would listen to a song like Already Gone or Take It Easy, that is probably correct. That is probably correct. Let's do that. So that's a good example of the client. Because what you're talking about is, it's funny, the comment you made. When people think about songwriting as a job, they wouldn't necessarily think about the fact that that there are clients involved. What's weird about that is, if that's true, that's been true for the smallest amount of time in the history of all art, right? If that's true, that's only true now, and only for such a small time that it's not nearly enough time to change the nature of what it means to be an artist. Because all throughout the history of art, the job has always been to, in order to make your living, you have to deal with clients, which means that you have to have enough information about this job and about the various contexts of the job that when the client suggests, I'd like some of this and some of that, you understand both of those things. When the client says, I want to bring this to life, you can actually do it, right? All throughout history, that's been the job. Whether it be the masters of painting or poetry, or there's only some realms where that's not true, because at the end of the day, songwriting is not, it is fictional, it's fictional writing, but it's not the genre of fiction, right? But again, that too has parameters, and they too have people to answer, right? It's not this lawless construct of sitting at your house and devising just whatever methodology that you feel like going about, and then some publisher will go wonderful and slap a label on it and pay for millions of. No, that's never been the job, and it won't be, right?
Are you sort of working in the audio version of what a professional graphic artist might do?
No, it's not that. And I'll tell you why.
Hmm.
It's more in league with what a professional painter would do. There's a deep relationship between the songwriter, not necessarily the artist. And again, that's the big distinction, right? Where I stand in the process, right? I initialize the process, or I at least take the initial concept and then I make it real, right? And look, man, 50% of the time people come to me and they say, "Hey, man, just write me something good in this genre." Right?
Hmm.
There is no idea. So when that occurs, that's just me writing. But my job parallel, it would be more of a parallel to a painter in the grand sense of the term, and a working painter, than it would be a graphic designer. A graphic designer, they have enough utilities at their disposal, enough tools that they've used, you know, um, all events that are in this genre will look like this, and all commercials that are in this genre will look like that. And you know what I mean? There's enough of that. Music has that, sure, but there's always some weird route to get to where you're going, right? So there is more abstraction involved, and I think that would be the big differentiator. When you're a painter, you're looking at a canvas, it's blank, and you're tasked with bringing this thing to reality, right? It could be, it could be a mirror trick level recreation of real life. But at the end of the day, that little esoteric feature that you see in that human will be the thing you bring out in that on that canvas, right? You will amplify that feature of this person's personality based on the way that you process that person's humanity. And the same is true of music. I don't think that the same is true with graphic design. I'm not disparaging that. I'm saying that there is a more functional and precise methodology by which that happens. I want from my graphic design, if I have seen examples of what you've done for an event that people came to and it looks professional, I want that. Give me that. That's what I want. There's a similarity between that and music, right? But the canvas is completely blank.
I see. Um, how many instruments do you play, and when did you start learning music?
So okay, from an autobiographical sense, I've never not played music. I've played music my entire life. I'm a third generation musician, although with the with the brand new wonderful technologies that we have at our disposal where we can look up family members to from the beginning of time,
Mhm.
it's been brought to my attention that I'm actually more like a seventh or eighth generation musician. Um, I would not necessarily say that their influence was responsible for anything that I've done from seven generations ago, but in any event, um, I grew up in a scenario where professional musicianship was common. In fact, when I was little, I sort of remember thinking to myself that all families were kind of like that, right? Your mom and dad were on the radio, and they sometimes moonlighted as television, local television characters, and they played music, and they'd get home at 3 o'clock in the morning, and
Ah,
that kind of thing. So that's always been there. The more difficult question is about the instrumentation. So what I do is a very strange thing. I'm a as an instrumentalist, I'm a piano player. Okay. That cut and dry, that simple. But any keyboard player will tell you that when you set about your lifelong journey to be a professional pianist, you are immediately asked to do everything else besides play piano, right? Dare you open your mouth about the fact that you can play a multitude of sounds and the way that the touch is designed and the way that that you would go about to recreate these sounds that are coming from your keyboard. If you ever open your mouth about that, that will be the totality of your job from that point forward. Okay. So, for example, if you tell people like, yeah, sure, I mean, I can play bass and piano at the same time. I can split the keys and do it, right? The bass player is fired. The next day, it's you, and you're only going to get the same amount of money that you did the day previous, right? Now you got two people's jobs. I've spent my entire life devoted to understanding the mechanics of instrumentation through the keyboard,
hmm.
right? My entire life. The way that you would approach a cello and the way that you approach a viola is not the same. The way that you approach a four-string ensemble, which I would never play as a patch, I would always play the strings individual to this day when I create any symphonic piece. These are distinct, lived in instruments. So, of that, maybe 100 some odd different instruments that I will use annually that I play live from the keyboard, guitar included. Um, because that's the job, right? I'm not, look, I'm not going to have enough of a lifetime to be a virtuoso at all of those given instruments, right? And by today's measure, now that we all have the software to be at home and to be creating the music that we're creating, competing with plugins, which will also do that, right? Um, I'm not going to interface with those people, right? I'm not going to interface with those people. So it's my responsibility. So cut to me at like 10 years old, sitting in front of a stereo system someplace, listening very intently to the string lines of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and trying to imitate exactly what the strings are doing in that song in order to make that sound exact. What string is on top? What string is in the middle? What string is being used? What are the cellos doing that differentiates that from the rest of the piece, right? That sort of thing. It's a lifelong obsession, my man.
Is that something you could hear simultaneously, or do you sort of have to tune in to each instrument and kind of hear them one at a time? Or has your ear developed where you could almost hear it symphonically, I guess?
It is that. It is that. And it's sort of what filmmakers talk about when they sort of they talk about knowing how the sausage is made, and so they sort of, they're not watching what you're watching anymore. And it's sort of difficult to remove themselves from that, be part of like the fabric of the screen, the mugginess of it, the look, the aesthetic of it. They're not there. They're processing something entirely different. And their appreciation, right? Harder to come by, but when it's earned on a way more important level. That is sort of how I'm listening to the music. And that's not necessarily the greatest thing. We have a thing in songwriting we talk about a lot between professional songwriters. We talk about being honest with yourself.
Mm.
Sounds real simple. Very rarely does it occur. Very rarely, right? The number one problem with songwriters trying to launch their careers is that they cannot, will not, won't not be honest with themselves. They just won't, right? Everything that they've ever written doesn't need another edit. It's the truest because they did it the first time, all of these things. The honesty with yourself, that's your ability to cut off the musician side of you and then listen to it from a songwriter perspective. What's the totality of this? Did it hit, what is it saying? Did it meet its quota? What is it doing? Okay, there's that. But these are two different hats, right? As a musician, when I'm listening to something, I'm very much focusing simultaneously on not just that. Let's say in the case of an Elton John, a Beatles song, something like this. I'm not just listening to the George Martin symphonic piece that sits atop of something, but I'm also listening to its relationship to the body itself to understand how it works, right? Clearly, I'm not talking about something like Eleanor Rigby where it is just that, but I'm talking about something more along the lines of like I'm the Walrus or something, right? So you listen to how these things, what is the complementary aspect and why does this work? Why do other things not impact the same way? Right. So, yes, I am listening for all of those things. Can I isolate one thing? Absolutely. Very much so. Right. But also, there is a certain way that you would go about writing. Let's call it the quartet. It was a good example of that. There's a specific layout that you're going to use almost all the time. Right, especially like, if you're fond of one sound or another. So I'm sort of accustomed to where these things would sit. I know where they're going to sit in the harmony pattern, right? Same is true of like the five-piece band. You know where that's going to sit, right? The guitar player is not going to be underneath the bass, right? That's not going to, he's not going to play the, you know what I mean? So you're accustomed to see how these things work. You can hear the mechanics simultaneously and you can isolate them. Yes.
And we'll get into lyrics probably a little bit later. When did you start dabbling or diving into like writing songs?
I never dabbled in writing songs.
Okay.
When I was 5, this sounds like it's fantasy. I'm not suggesting this, and I'm certainly not going to say that I'm right.
And
But
also, excuse me, just 1 second. I just turned the heater on. Is that really loud? Can you hear me just as well? Is it distracting?
now it's sort of gone.
Okay. I just don't want it to interfere with any of this.
My first song,
Thanks.
my first songwriting cut, we refer to it as a cut when a band cuts material of yours.
Hmm.
I was 5 years old. Um, the band was my father's band, so that would make sense, right? But it was a fully fledged song. My father had a band called the Southern Empire Band. Years later, a very famous band comes out called Southern Empire. Very strange. I wonder if I could take them to court. Anyway, um, so my father's on the radio 5 nights a week. They had this live performance top 40 program that they do in the early 80s, right? And it's crazy that this world exists, right? Where a band is so popular in its given area, right? Its own tri-cities, its own whatever, this is in Northern California though. And this is on FM radio where it's being projected in the 80s to, oh man, a ton of people all throughout Northern California in general, probably all the way to San Francisco from the Sacramento area where we are, right? And so this this world is a different world, Anthony. It's a world where things like the jukebox hit is still a thing. It's charted by Billboard. And so a jukebox hit is when people from a given area are popular. They're famous in that area. And they track the jukebox because they want to know when you walk into a place and you put your quarter in and you want to listen to somebody, is the person that lives locationally in your proximity as famous as Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson, right? These folks, that's what they're tracking. And there's something that's very right about that, right? That world is gone in the closeness and the smallness that the internet, all brought us together. It didn't. What it did was it eliminated sort of that regional aspect, right? But before that, there's this other world where a band like that is as famous, at least in your head, as Willie Nelson, as Fleetwood Mac. Because in your mind, you watch their commercials on a local level. You hear them on the radio, right? That kind of thing. So this was sort of the world that I grew up in. And immediately they had me guest featuring, I was singing. So I would sing one song a night as a cute, here's the child to sing. And then it was two, and then it was three, and then it was a set. And then it was, well, if you're going to be on stage, what are you going to do? You're going to play something? Are you going to contribute? It was that kind of thing. My father also was a staff writer. And so on the nights where he wasn't playing, which were few and far between, he would be up until just all levels of egregious hours of the morning with the wives downstairs. That's sort of how it split in my mind, and I can still sort of see it. And he would sit at this small little white table that we had with the songwriters, and they would argue viciously about what their character would or would not do, right? They would violently, right, to defend their post. And I would sit at that table. And it didn't take very long until I would pitch ideas and be kicked out of that table, right? At 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, if you and your no good 20-something musician buddies signed to Sony, Capitol, whatever the case is, writing songs, under the bannership of BMI, are going to be as loud as they can, then your 2, 3, 4-year-old kid is not going to go to sleep. This is the world that I grew up in, right? I remember the story specifically of being kicked out. I remember telling a guy who will go unnamed. I remember telling the songwriter at the table at one point that he didn't know how to close the loop of his narrative. I was 4. That got me kicked out. Really, that was not good. That was not a good thing. So my father, being a proud dad, followed me around one day as I'm writing a song and said, this thing is complete. This whole thing is complete. And that sort of kicked off the songwriting journey. And now in my head, when you're a child, I assumed I was a published songwriter. To me, there's no, this was not miraculous or strange, or it was just sort of what we did, right? That's what we did. And so immediately I'm writing songs. Then I go to start writing songs with his contemporaries. And then people beyond that network, devising my own network. And then eventually in my early teens, I was signed to a small staff when there were still such things.
Staff of songwriting staff.
Yeah, which sounds more romantic. That sounds like Tin Pan Alley. That sounds like the cubicles with where when you say that to somebody, it sounds very buttoned up and professional, which I like, by the way.
Can you give me a 90-second overview of Tin Pan Alley? Because everybody's familiar with the term, but if you held them down, I think a lot of people couldn't describe it in depth.
Absolutely. So much like Brill Building, Tin Pan Alley is 90 seconds.
You could take longer.
It is both a very specific environment and sort of a loose suggestion of a time and an era. But if we got super specific about it, we'd say, yeah, man, like the camp that was projecting songs from the Great American Songbook. So anything that you would, Cole Porter, that is the sound. That's what we're talking about. And so guys like Cole Porter, it's not necessarily his job to be the famous one, though he's super famous, right? But sort of the Rogers and Hammerstein, this is where this stuff is emanating from. And we got to remember, like very early in music, where popular music is emerging from is from the stage, because the venue by which you go in and you interface with popular music is probably going to be, when I say the stage, I mean the theatrical stage,
Mhm.
right? So these are the big dominant songs of the era. These are the things that songwriters want to write for, and this is why they get so good at writing narrative. And it has to be that, right? It's not sort of what Howard Ashman does all those years later with the 90s Disney resurgence, where he brings them back to the notion of writing the narrative into the songs and stop with these unpolished, silly pop things that they're doing, right? When he launches music, him and Minkin, when they launch music like in Beauty and the Beast, bring it back to pushing the narrative forward, or why are you opening your mouth? Right? So that sound, Tin Pan Alley, these are your workaday songwriters, right? Work, like this is work. This is what they do for a living. This is their job. Get in a tie, get in a suit, get your ass in gear, do the job and do it well, right? This is not ethereal artistic explanations of why people don't understand you and they don't relate. That's not the job. Okay, the job is to craft something in the grand tradition of the craft itself, that speaks to the human condition, to complete its thought, right? And to reach people and to make them say, I felt exactly like that, but I've never known how to say it. That's the job. That's what the job is, right? So that's what Tin Pan Alley is, and it's sort of the structural high point of what a staff could be on a staff. But that's not what we mean when we say songwriting staff now. What we mean, and what we've meant for a very long time, is we mean people who are under retainer. So you've sort of proven that, like, hey, like I get it, I get the formulas, I get what's going on here. I can write songs in this person's vein and that person and this person's, and I'm more likely to pitch you guys songs that you can pitch artists that they're going to be into, because I'm good at this and I understand how to break this stuff down, right? And the people that will put you under a publishing deal, they say, sure, okay, so we'll give you X amount of money. You give us X amount of songs per month, by whatever the case might be, and then this will put us in a position of being able to pitch it. We'll pitch it for you with our network, and then we will take blank amount of the publishing, because this is our network, and you don't have said network, right? That's a very loose interpretation of what it is to enter that realm of being on staff. And then there were different levels of that for a long time. Now there are no levels of that, but there was different levels of that for a long time. So you could be, on a major label and be on their staff. That means you are absolutely going to, at the least, pitch your songs to A-list artists. They're gonna hear you, that and that enters the game of sales. You'll probably be there, right? So you're gonna be pitching this stuff. You'll be presenting it much like Mad Men, but with music, right? Very much that realm, right? So if you're good at pitching, you're good at speaking, you can land your point and you can follow through, then you'll probably sell this concept to somebody. But there's much smaller staffs as well, and all the way up. Some of them have, 6-7 degrees of separation between that major thing that they're trying to aim at and wherever you are in life. And some of them are the thing itself, right? Back in them their days, when the coffee shops were amazing and the staffs were still around.
What does the average music fan, and maybe even casual musician, uh, misunderstand or just simply not understand about the world of the music that they enjoy?
You look, that net is so wide you could throw it over an ocean, right?
Within that question, there are many little rivulets that you could take. So take whichever one you want. I'm sorry for that interruption, but Tommy, you and I both know full well that coffee refills are always necessary.
This interview and no interview is going to proceed without coffee.
So I remember my last question was sort of poorly phrased, but I think you know where you'd want to go with it. So take it where you'd like.
You were asking, are there things that people don't know about music, right? Either songwriters, musicians, the audience. And it's like, oh, dude, an unbelievable amount of things. Unbelievable. But without being in like the murky shadows of, well, what's the litigious nature of it? What are the politics that really go in? How do you like really sell yourself into a situation? Like, what's a who's this shadowy figure that we call the song plugger? Does he still exist? Is that person the gatekeeper? Um, what is a tour buy on? It's how all your currently famous bands made it. That's what it is. But there are like there are things you could like really pull back and that are, I think, super interesting. So one of those would be from the audience's perspective. Lots of people don't realize that the tribute act that you see at the local theater is probably the most technically gifted musicians you'll ever see, right? They're without fail better musicians than the four-piece band that is all famous, that all the members of said band are famous. It's not close. Um, the hired gun musician, now this is common in music. We all understand this. The hired gun musician is a phenomenally talented person, right? So that maybe the audience doesn't see that, right? Because there is a there's a sort of a presupposition that works with seeing a tribute act, and then this is hilarious. So the night before last, I fell down the Elvis impersonation rabbit hole. Now you might ask yourself, what were you doing here? Why were you chasing that rabbit before it even went through the rabbit hole? And why did you enter? You know better. It's a rabbit hole. True. But I have this deep affinity for the working musicians standing next to the guy. Here's a guy, he's grown out his lamb chops like in full, right? He's got himself in like a 70s like get up, right? Like he's doing the thing. Now we're there to judge whether or not he's landing this imitation, right? That's the gig. But what I'm doing is I'm watching the drummer in the background going like, CC Rider is not the drum pattern you think it is. It is hard. It is phenomenal. That guy's always going to be a great musician. The guy who's playing, who's doing the Burton guitar lines, he's always going to be a great musician. These bands, 9 times out of 10, are going to be great. My wife hit the wall. I found the exact place where her tolerance runs out entirely for the notion of tribute or impersonation acts. And here's the line. The line is, don't ever impersonate Elvis. That's the line. I found it. Right?
Why is that?
She just couldn't. She was not having it.
Oh.
Right? And I was trying to explain. I was like, listen, baby, it's not. Look, if you do a tribute act, we can all say, okay, we're a tribute band. We dress like us, whatever, right? We sing like us. We just so happen to play the music of Led Zeppelin or AC/DC or whatever the case is. If you do the Beatles, you don't just show up in your daytime clothes. Oh, yeah.
Relative of mine.
No way. You got to be kidding
Yes.
me.
Yeah, he's amazing. His name is Jim Barone. And when we're done, I'll send you some of his stuff.
So when I was 8, my dad's so about the time of being 8 years old, this all relates. California passes its no smoking ban. In fact, I might have been a little bit younger than that. I'm not real positive. I'm sort of lost on the timeline. But it passes its no smoking indoor ban. And it's like the first place that does this, right? It's all across the board. And this has an unintended or perhaps intended consequence. Mm. It immediately cuts the live music environments by half, right? The people are, it's a combination of the inconvenience of it to people, right? But it's also the principle of it, right? And so, you know how your common like free market thinker is. I'm very familiar with this thought process, right? And so they're going like, just based on principle, I'm staying home, right? Which is right to a certain degree, but this is California. You weren't going to change it. Nothing you were going to, you weren't going to change it. So things start to work backward. The places where my dad has a stake in, where he's entertainment director over here, and he's the radio stations over there. These crowds start to dip, and so everyone's knee jerk reaction is, "Oh my God, the sky is falling." Well, it does. It does fall, right? And all of these great venues that Sacramento had for live music are suddenly on very thin ice, and or the ice is broken. So one of my dad's buddies and co-writing friends moves out to Nashville, and he's pitching some songs and stuff starts to really cook. And so he calls him and says, "Hey, listen, Jones, get out here. Things are cooking." And we do, right? So my dad, he's out there to pitch music. And in the meantime, pitching music to artists doesn't pay your bills, right? So he seemingly walks right into being the drummer for the #1 tribute act or Elvis impersonation act in Nashville, which is, again, it sounds, when you hear the thing, it sounds like something. You're like, the Elvis tribute guy, that guy. Right. The guy who's playing to 3,000 to 5,000 people per night, right? These gigs are not to be scoffed at, right? These are rare air gigs that musicians spend their whole lives. This is the thing they're looking to do. If you're not the songwriter, if you're not the singer, the entertainer, if you're the guy who's playing, and your bread and butter, you're feeding your kids, is all contingent on whether or not that guy out front is going to be able to market himself properly, or girl, whatever the case might be, they're going to be able to build a career, right? Then you're looking for these coveted spots. And that is the ladder that will get you then to doing tours, and then to being with, relevant, prevalent artists, right? This is the ladder. That's how it works. So he wasn't necessarily trying to put himself back on the road again, right? He was trying to support his kid and be able to be out there. But that group and that experience left a profound impact on me, because I realized all of the guys in this band are also the studio musicians who are appearing on all of your favorite songs. They're the same guys, right? And these guys have to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that to be able to make enough money to call it a living, right? So the same guy who's playing the guitar solo on the #1 hit record in the United States is the same guy who is also playing with the Elvis tribute act, because he's got to put enough of these things together in order just to make a livable wage. And he lives in one of the most high profile places on earth, right? Be that as it may, that's all to justify why the hell was I on YouTube watching a bunch of Elvis impersonators? And that's all to say my wife wasn't having it. But that's something that the audience doesn't relate to. They don't relate to the idea that these people are in a situation where you only get to that situation because somebody tells so-and-so that you're good enough to do it, right? These are not going to be auditions, right? That tribute act that you see, I'm not talking about the local tribute act who works in like some bar someplace. We've all had our bar gigs, you know what I mean? That's how you come up. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the guys who play at the theater that put 3,000 people in it to do a Journey knockoff, right? Well, in your mind, they're just guys or whatever. Okay. But the truth is that every single person in that band probably had to be name dropped by another person in that band, that they've earned the right to be in those spots, and they make some of the best money that you can make. And then there a lot of those guys, like right now, one of my closest friends and co-writer, like 25 years, he's got a couple of tribute situations that he does. And his group can be comprised of anybody from guys who play on Broadway right this minute to people in Billy Joel's band right this minute, right? That's the life of a hired gun. So the audience doesn't really, they don't know that. They don't realize, who are the most talented, what's the hierarchy that musicians use to see it, right? So from your perspective, if I say like, oh yeah, he's the bass player in a tribute band, you might take your takeaway. If I say it to a working musician, they're like, oh, right? What I've said is, that dude can play. That's what I've said, right? Not cover band. And I do want to make sure that we're very distinct about that. Look, cover bands are usually very proficient as well. But that's this wide ranging, that could be anything, right? That's almost as esoteric a terminology as pop, right? When we say covered, it's like, what does that mean? It everything. It just means that you're not playing originals. That's it. When we say tribute, you know what you're after, right? If I said we're going to go watch a Fleetwood Mac tribute band, you don't expect them to be a jazz interpretive rendition of Fleetwood Mac. You expect it to sound like Fleetwood Mac. So that's that perspective. If you want to talk about what songwriters and folks don't know when they get in, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, well, one thing I would like to hear from you after my next question is possibly just like practical advice for people who are looking to get into this field. But before that, do a lot of people find you through word of mouth? How do many of your clients find you? And I know you have quite a few.
Okay, so today's songwriter, there's nothing that is romantic about what I do for a living. And at this point in my 40s, I'm not positive that that's really what I want. You know what I mean? I want to be able to work hard, feel like I did the job, and feel like I earned the right to feed my family and have my house and, my vehicles and what have you. Okay. So by today's standard, the way that lots of songwriters work is through a combination of the networks that you've built in your life, freelance sites of which I'm on and I'm a big believer of. I have zero problem with saying that. And I do, because and I'll tell you why I bring that up. I know songwriters who they have to have 3 or 4 different jobs within the music business to try to make ends meet, and sometimes they don't. And they have like a real problem with the notion that the way that the record industry was laid out is no more. And so they have these delusions where they talk about like, well, I'm not going to be on some freelance site for people to purchase my services. And it's like, you don't seem to understand you're not behind the wall anymore, right? That's not where we live. I know many #1 hit smash songwriters who can't make a living writing songs. They have #1 hits, more than one. Imagine in your life that you would have a #1 hit, it's the biggest song in the world, right? And you can't pay your bills. You wrote this thing, right? And the fact that you wrote this thing isn't enough to inspire other people for the rest of your life to hire you, because you're liable to do it again, right? More than, I mean, you're I don't know what the percentage is, but it's such a unimaginably small percent of people who have ever written a hit song, right? Mm-hmm. That when it happens, it usually happens over and over again from those people. You're in the rarest of air, right? But they don't. And so they too are on these freelancing sites and stuff like that. I'm one of the only people that I know. In fact, I might be the only person that I know who makes his living entirely off of writing music. Because granted, it's a combination of different things that I do to provide that, but it is what I do. I also, I don't go and play live music anymore. I did that for 30 plus years, but I don't do that anymore. And I don't have another business to speak of. I'm in the business of me. I'm in the songwriting business. So where clients come to me is in that situation. By today's standards, these situations are fairly professional, given sort of my rates and what I do and the language that I speak. When you first see my material, the common, I very rarely meet somebody who says, "Hey, I'd like a song for my wife," or "I'd like that's not me. That's not really what I do." Right. That is a living. And if you're good at it, you absolutely should do it. And in fact, it will teach you so much about the client's expectations, right? And about genre and about formula. There's a lot to be learned by doing that. That just doesn't so happen to be what I do. Even in these environments, your Fivers, your freelancer.com, your whatever the case might be, 9 times out of 10, I'm talking to somebody who is either talking to me on behalf of a business or the business. Um, and and that's where we've kind of landed. Now these professional environments, they understand that they can come and find you based on the set of criteria that you say, this is what I do, right? That they're looking for that specific thing and they come and find you. Granted, it's still very difficult. So I see number one hit songwriters on these platforms. And when I speak to them, they go, yeah, well, I work an office job. I have a little business where I do this. I play music sometimes, and I'm sometimes I pitch music still and I do some freelance work. And I'm in a very it's luck, and I just so happen to have these exact set of skills that work in today's technological landscape to be able to do what I do. You know what I mean? The things that I was interested in as a child just so happen to be the exact things that we're gonna make it possible to make a living being a songwriter.
So thank you for that, by the way. So if somebody pitches a need or an idea, or even just completely unformed idea, but they have an endpoint in mind, you might create the music, you might work on the computer, you might write down words, you might do all of these things. Are you doing any like video editing? Like what is like the package of skills that you might dip into?
No, I joke about that. I joke that in today's world, like we have to be producers and video editors and voiceover artists and copywriters and but the truth is, yes, you do all of that because you have to put yourself out there and you put yourself into enough situations. So about 50% of the I don't know if I answered this directly. So about 50% of the clients that I work with are people that come from external networks that it's word of mouth, it's that kind of thing. Um you know, and then 50% are brand new clients. Um the clients expect usually that I get them from, hey, I need this thing for a television show. Hey, I need this thing for the end credits of a film. Hey, I need this thing for my record. This is going to be the third single this is going to be the first single we launch in the summer, right? Here's the sound. Here's what their expectation is. Their expectation is to take that idea and give them the final product. Okay.
Mhm.
So how that works with a vocalist is you're essentially you're doing all of the you're writing, you're arranging, you're producing, you're creating all the instrumentation, obviously lyrics included with that. You're offering a guide vocal to say, learn the song, here's my voice on it so that you can know how it goes. You'll go to the studio, you'll cut it, here's your instrumental, and here's your tracks. If they want to reproduce the thing, they can, but here's my finalized version, here's how I hear it going. Throw your vocals on it, right? And that is a lot more common in every facet of the music industry than people think that it is, right? From major producers, right? This is a remote world. This is a remote world. And that is sort of the process.
Do a lot of the songs that people hear on the radio, even classic favorite songs, um, is there a large percentage of those songs that were written by other people, and then the vocalist, like the vocal talent, just kind of finished it off?
Not precisely that, what you're saying. First question first. Yes, absolutely. Um, the vast majority of songs that make up, okay, the vast majority of songs from in the history of pop music, maybe 95 to 98% were written by professional songwriters, right? Um, the idea of writing your own songs sort of comes about in the 50s, but we're still it's tricky and people are still trying to wrap their head around it, right? Consider that all of the things that happened in Frank Sinatra's era, sort of as the beginning of pop music and the first pop star that we have. That's all the Great American Songbook, or what will later become the Great American Songbook, are already standards in his day, right? And so what sort of happens is the traditional pop vocalists, their idea is to draw a line in the sand and square off with the Great American Songbook to present their thing. What's interesting in this conversation is Elvis decides at one point to do the same thing. When we everyone romanticizes his 50s period and his badass, you know, but what Elvis is doing in the late 60s and 70s is he's making the decision to lay the hammer down and say, I want to be judged on my ability as a powerful vocalist, and I'm going to take on the Great American Songbook. I'm going to take this on, right? And I want to be judged in the same capacity that we would judge Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, right? That's what he's doing. And so, yeah, by majority, these songs are written by other people. Now in the 50s, we've got guys like Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry. They're starting to write their own music. Chuck Berry, by the way, is an incredible lyricist. If you really go back and look at the descriptive situations he puts his characters in, right? It's real, but while that's happening, that's not the norm. It's not even close to the norm, right? We've got folks like Ray Charles, who his first couple of hits come directly from the studio, right? We don't think about it like that, but it's true. Elvis, of course, his entire catalog is comprised of songwriters' stuff. His story is not the story of theft that people make it out to be, nor is his story so uncommon and wild. Oh my goodness, Elvis demanded this amount of publishing and stuff. Everybody demands that amount of publishing to this very day. That's the nature of it. The idea here is they're the gatekeepers, right? You're not going to waltz in through the door and say, give me everything. And they go, right on, here's our network of stuff. That's not how business works, right? So then about the 60s, that's where this notion of, well, you're supposed to write your songs. That's where that notion first starts to come into play. And so then it becomes split. So in rock and roll, it's very common. You're the songwriter, right? And we have lots of silly things to show for that, right? In country music, to this day, extremely uncommon that you'd be the songwriter. Those songs are written by staff people or just established writers, right? Pop music, always written by somebody else. Because in pop music, 9 times out of 10, everything is the package, from the notion of like, let's hire the person. This is what they'll look like. This is what we'll call it. This is the music that we'll have. This is the demographic we're going after. This is the background dancers. This is what the lights will look like, right? That thing is not just written by, it's manufactured, right? It's a totally different ball of wax. So, yeah, most of all music is written by professional musicians, professional songwriters, and that's a good thing. These are people who devote themselves to the concept of that. Most of my favorite bands, musicians, and otherwise are actual songwriters, right? Which is strange. That's my musician hat, right? But you have to appreciate that the job itself is a job. It's funny, you can see these old clips, 1963, 1964, and the reporters are just merciless. You watch them talk to the Beatles, and they're just the most rude, just demeaning people, right? So they'll say things like this: when all of this is over with, what do you think you'll do? Right? Like, hey, when this career of yours comes crashing to a halt, then what? Right? And so Paul will kind of go like, well, me and John have talked about it, and I guess we'll spend the rest of our life like writing songs. That's what we do. We like to write songs. So they think in their head that if you want to have a sustainable career, what you do is write music for other people. So right out of the gate, that's what they're doing. They're writing songs for other people. They have this vast catalog for other artists from the word jump, because they want to establish, hey, we've got our hooks into publishing. We've got our hooks into other copyright. And when this goes away, because we don't know what this is and we don't know how long it lasts, right? Because it's so early in rock and roll, right? It's 10 years in rock and roll at that point, right? So they're like, we don't know how long this lasts. This, maybe it's 10 years, you're gone, right? Mm. So they're thinking the only people who survive and the only way to make a living is to write music. And then somewhere later on in that decade, it starts to flip where there's a different notion. But it's totally imagined to believe that most people write their songs. They don't, and they shouldn't.
Can you talk about the word narrative for a little while? But before you start, a little context. You know, I teach. You know, I teach, and what I teach is eighth grade. And one of the things that I like to do with my students is give them about a list of 30 sort of poetic songs that are narrative based, but that have, you know, poetic technique, because that's just, it's like a nice, it's a fun way to get into analyzing poetry, and it's sort of like a launching pad before we get into deeper poetry.
Well, hold on before you go on. I'd like to know about some of these songs. What are your choices?
Oh man, well, I have Highwayman, I have one or two songs from Tom Waits, I have Brian Adams song, I have
Everything I do.
the Pete no, the House is on the Hill. It's a really cool song.
Yeah.
Uh, the something county PTA. I can't. It's slipping my mind. I have,
Harper Valley PTA.
yeah. I have the redheaded stranger.
Yeah,
Uh,
you do.
got a couple Kenny Rogers songs. Fast Car. I don't know. There's like 25 or 30, and I'm looking for more all the time. But it's very hard to find school appropriate content and lyrics. So, if is there anything that comes to mind off the top of your head that's just great storytelling?
Oh, well,
Sure, there is.
with the exception of one line.
That's the
It,
problem.
yeah, it really is. I was just thinking the first, well, Eleanor Rigby, first of all. I mean, you could never stop teaching this, right? Eleanor Rigby. The fact that this Paul's an exception to every rule in music, right? But yeah, that one's a good one. Penny Lane would be a great one because Penny Lane uses this very strange device, right? Very strange, where we are observers of what is being told to us as the play of life, right? And it's happening in real time in the song. We see the banker sitting waiting for a trim, right?
Yeah.
The way that it's being described. And he knows he's doing it and he talks about it at length that it's the song is happening while you listen to the song. And it is an observable play. It's a very strange lyric that's wrapped in this in the middle of what sounds like a very fluffy pop song, right? But it's not. It's got a very, you know, Beatles fans, like the off the deep end Beatles fans, of which I am one. We know that there's a frequency that exists in the Beatles music, which is not nearly as safe and friendly as it presents itself as. There is, you know, there's a constant alluding to some sort of darkness that you don't ever get to really uncover
Mm.
in a Beatles song, right? But Eleanor Rigby, that, you know, that is a great example. You can pull anything from the Born to Run record.
I'm not sure if this is working, but,
There you go.
and I don't want to take too much time with this. This is just at a glance. School appropriate all. So this is just for maybe for off camera. If you have any ideas for things that I could add, because I'm always asking my friends for items that I might add to that list to
Cool.
sort of update it. But do you have any favorite songwriters or songs that would be appropriate to talk about in this conversation?
Well,
Relevant?
it depends on what the conversation is. When we talk about favorite things, right? Again, this is probably a lot like a filmmaker watching different things. And so it's, you know, are we talking about the shadows? Are we talking about what's happening with the camera? Are we talking about performance? Are we talking about, you know, it's all of these different things, right? So when it comes to songwriting, um, I have people that I think are very, very good at this and very, very good at that, right? And then I have very broad ideas about what songwriting is and how to get into it and what are there actual rules? The answer to that is yes, there are actual rules.
Mhm.
Should there be actual rules? The answer is yes, there should be actual rules. And because I can tell you this, rest assuredly, you might be able to make the case that there is no definitive answer to what to do when writing a good song. Maybe. But you can absolutely make the case that there are definitive answers of what to never do to write a good song. So, with that said, there are obviously rules in place. One of my favorite songwriters of all time is the most successful country songwriter in the history of all songwriting, and perhaps the most successful songwriter in the history of recorded music. His name is Dean Dillon. Dean Dillon wrote basically every single number one hit that George Strait's ever had, which is over 50 number one hits. But he's not limited to just George Strait. Lots of folks misunderstand what's happening in country songwriting. They misunderstand the dual aspect of the narrative that's being presented to you. The fact that there's a top line metaphor which uses a specific set of linguistics that only live within inside the universe that it's developing, and then underneath that, a game that's happening for songwriters where they continue to only reference things that are laid out in their metaphor, and then underneath that, they push the narrative into a 3-act play. Right. This goes back to something that my dad said to me when I was a kid, and I think I've shared this with you before. I was talking about maybe an Eagles song or a Billy Joel song or something. I was talking about the simplicity of it, right? I was talking to my dad. I was sitting at the coffee shop and was talking about how easy it is to sort of just write that kind of thing. And my dad's, career songwriter. He's watching me. He's watching me. And I'm sort of arrogantly saying that. And he goes, right? He said, well, you're very worried about that. I said, well, this is my great competition, Dad. These are the people I step up against with history. And my dad scoffs and says, Dickens is your competition. And that notion, right? He says, you're not supposed to be learning from songwriters. You're supposed to be learning from writers. Hmm. You're not a song writer. You're a writer. The job is to write. Writers write. The job is to write. You just so happen to be in a field where the melodic context is a spoken entity. It's part of the narrative itself. So using that to your advantage, there are some things that you do not need to explain because you give that information through the melodic context, right? For example, we don't have to talk about whether, if we just start Hotel California, if we just start the beginning of it, right? And there's many people who disparage the Eagles. I understand that. I'm using the most popular reference on purpose. I don't have to tell you that the song is happening at night. You understand. You got it. The minute the song starts. So there it is. Now I can tell you in the lyrics, I can sort of go all through the lyrics with you and walk you through how you get to this information. But the point I'm making is that that's part of the dialogue. The music is part of the dialogue. So as a songwriter, I have to take that into account. But still, this is writing either way I look at it. I have to be careful of the redundancy when I'm laying a melody out, right? I have to be careful about hammering points home to you. I don't have to tell you this, this is an emotional situation. Is it a ballad? Is it at 70 beats per minute? Do I really need to stop what I'm doing in my bridge and go, you ought to really feel sad about this, right? Or is that context already present, right? But with that said, even if the melody itself adds to the language of what it is, it's still just writing, which means that there's plenty to be learned from the canon. There's plenty to be learned, right? So when we talk about like what writers really reach me and what do I think the job is, it's like Kafka. Kafka really reaches me, which is strange because the limited narrative of Kafka is not going to influence the way that I write music. In fact, I write on a multitude of narrative, much less just a fraction, right? But there's so much to be learned about setting an emotional template, right? Why some words next to other words evoke dread or confusion. They're words. You can read them. How does that solicit confusion from you? You can see it. You can read it over and over again, right? And then it's on purpose and intentional. Dickens that I mentioned, Dean Dillon, the songwriter. I think that Paul is an underrated for being the most rated anything in the history of music. Paul is the most underrated everything in music. Paul McCartney, right? When a guy can sort of usher in different genres on a whim by some natural compulsion that just he gravitates toward, right? This is somebody that you should analyze for the rest of your life, and you would be the better for it, right? Everybody from Tin Pan, Rodgers and Hammerstein, right? To really like get into what's going on there. Howard Ashman from Disney. Howard Ashman, this brilliant lyricist. Brilliant lyricist, right? You may not hear that in what I'm doing. And that's okay. In the same way that, you know, some kid that that sees Twin Peaks for the first time, it may not go this. He might dominate rom-coms for the rest of his life. You may not understand exactly what it is that he took from that and then went on this journey, right? Mm-hmm. But all of that is doing something. So I believe in the fundamentals. You know, it's so funny about art, right? When we talk about art, there's this almost disrespectful thing that happens when somebody talks about rules and fundamentals and stuff like that, right? Like there's almost this like, you know, that's too rigid. But isn't it ironic that when we talk about the exceptional athletes, then everybody's on the same page? Well, the fundamentals, the rules, everybody's on the same page about that. If some athlete were to come along and go, well, yeah, you know, screw the rules and screw your fundamentals, I don't need your free throws, right? We would immediately call that a jerk. You're some sort of a jerk off. Get out of here, right? It's very strange about that. It's like, this has far more rules than that. This is far more cemented into the historicity of everything. Like what, you know what I mean? Like the fundamentals are crucial. The standards are crucial. And you can hear, Anthony, you can hear the difference. A guy who knows his standards, right? His great American standards, his great Western canon standard. A guy who knows that stuff, who can break that stuff down, what they'll do with their life, what they'll do with their music, and somebody who doesn't, you can hear it instantly. And one of those two people have a chance to make a living at it, right? It's respect of the thing, right? I have no idea where we started with that question. I just went nuts.
I'm looking at your keyboard behind you.
Let me tell you what
when we're done, you're going to play us out. Is that okay?
Let me tell you what I did with this keyboard.
Yeah.
My YouTube decided that I wanted to see a live performance of Michael McDonald that was happening like at his house. He was just at his house, right? So YouTube, you know, in my algorithm, there it was. And it says Michael McDonald live. And he looks, and it's, you know, Michael McDonald looks like you're like a professor grandfather at this point. You know what I mean? And I'm like, well, that's cool. And of course, like, you know, you click it and he's always looked like that, right? Like he's got like elbow pads. You know what I'm saying? Like he's got a pocket protector here. No, he like takes his glasses off and like sits them to the side and like, you know, has a little wet nap and what have you, and then proceeds to play like amazing soul music and R&B. And you're like, what is happening? Right? So I'm watching Michael McDonald and he's playing his ass. He's so much better of a piano player than people even know. People always think like, oh yeah, like What a Fool Believes and all. Yeah, this is all like real ditty stuff. Sit down and play it. Get your left hand or right hand doing that shit, and then try to sing it and see how you feel about it. See how that works out for you, right? I'm watching him, and the thought crosses my mind, I need that keyboard, right? That's it. I'll sound just like him. All I need is that keyboard, right? So I went out and bought it. That's what I did. So this keyboard is the keyboard that I watched Michael McDonald perform live on YouTube. And after, and you devote like 40 years of your life to something, you
Yeah.
think you're smart enough to know like that, you dummy, that's not the measure of whether or not you're going to sound like Michael McDonald. Nope. No, because somewhere in your artistic delusion, you're like, no, well, that's clear. You know what? I'd play that song so much better if I just had that keyboard. Right? It's like
Did it work?
that's some weird like guitar player level delusion.
Yeah. Were you right?
Would you say?
Were you right?
The patches sure do sound a lot like the patches he was playing. Yeah. Listen, it's uh the features of the keyboard are exactly the same.
I'm actually looking because I do have a. Can I give you? Can we do a speed round? I know you like speed rounds.
I hate your guts so bad sometimes.
Great, not good. Great songwriter. Yes or no? Okay.
Oh, dude, everybody is gonna hate my guts about this. I
You
have
can say,
no
you can
way
say
to
no.
be dishonest about this conversation. I've spent
Yeah.
my
Bi-
I
Billy
really
Joel.
should. I should really. This is the moment to
Billy
finally
Joel.
step up to dishonesty.
Billy Joel.
Billy Joel is an incredible songwriter who can write anything he wants to. And Billy Joel could be the keyboardist in any band that he felt like being in, period. He's an incredibly underrated piano player. Let's not forget, Billy Joel wrote the biggest country song ever, right? That's not I Will Always Love You, but there's a case to be made. I Will Always Love You, biggest pop song ever. Well, that's true. And then Shameless is the biggest country song of all time, which was written by Billy Joel. Um, Billy Joel can write in any space he wants to, man.
Um, Willie Nelson.
Unbelievable songwriter and very influenced by Western swing music, which is near and dear to my heart.
Prince.
Prince is an amazing songwriter who's very disinterested in whether or not you want him to do the thing that you like, right? But he's proven time and time again, right, with his work with other artists. He's proven time and time again. Anytime that he wanted to enter the space of like just sheer pop 3.5 minute dominating chart topping hit music at will, he could just do that, right? But Prince, I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but whereas to Willie Nelson would consider himself a songwriter first, Billy Joel would consider himself a songwriter first. I think Prince would have considered himself a musician first, right? And when you're a virtuoso of that magnitude on so many different stringed instruments and not, from my understanding, your mind, artistic expression in terms of the parameters of improvisation and things like that stuff starts to enter into it because you're also this really studio minded person, and it's a different level of meticulousness that asks an entirely different question, which is a very important thing to understand, right? So he's not all the time asking the same question that Willie Nelson is asking, and certainly not Billy Joel, right? They're asking different questions. You know what I mean?
I have somebody for you. Ed Kalehoff.
Who is this?
He wrote a lot of game show music. He wrote the theme song for Monday Night Football. I think he wrote most of the Price is Right music. How about Lionel Richie?
Well, let me just answer to that. So I wasn't familiar with that person by name, but I've done quite a bit of that. What we used to banner as jingle writing. I wouldn't say it's even 25% of what I do, but I've done a lot of it, right? Because I do a crazy amount of writing throughout the year, like just a ton of like hundreds and hundreds of things, right? So it is a lot, either way you splice it. And it is a specific artistry unto itself. It is not easy to consolidate a beginning, middle, and ending idea that speaks from the first note to the last note, that holds attention, that then evokes the nature of something into getting you prepared. It is not a simple thing to do. And any notion that there's some sort of relationship between like a jingle writer who rattles off a phone number for your car insurance company versus like Jeopardy. That's not the same. It is not the same,
Yeah.
right? And the fact that you can do it, and you could do it so many times, and you could do it to this point where the relationship between that that song and this show is inseparable, and may in fact be the relationship. It might be the tone. That person may be devising the tempo and the rhythm of how people interact in everything just based on that one thing alone. It's very, you know, I have nothing but kind things to say about that.
Yeah. I listen to the Price is Right music for fun. That's like my casual listening music.
Like, that's my
Lionel,
favorite song. I got an hour loop.
Lionel, no, all the different like all the different tracks, because they're all different little themes for the various games on the show. How about Lionel Richie? And then we got to go in a minute or
So
two.
like Lionel Richie lives in a very similar camp to like Barry Gibb, right? Where I was just talking to my wife about this sort of thing last night about Linda Ronstadt. It's weird now. Now it seems like media lives forever, right? Like, so if you're familiar with somebody in 2005, 2010, 2015, whatever, it seems like that media sort of lives forever. And then the way that algorithms have devised our listenership, our viewership, things like this, if somebody's famous to you, it's kind of gone back to the regional aspect, but it's sort of locked out other people from entering into the fray. That's the downside of algorithms are, if you like this, then you'll like that. And if you
Mhm.
like that, then you'll like this. And you'll only like this. And that's what you'll like, right? So that's the downside of it. It's not a jukebox. It's not an open thing, right? But these people sort of, they now live with you. However, it's weird that there was this time where that didn't really happen. And this relates to what I'm talking about with Lionel Richie. It's easy for you to forget. It's easy for us to kind of forget, like, this person has as many credits as any of the absolute most successful songwriters who have ever written a song in the history of mankind, like the Brothers Gibb, right? You don't even look at it like that. You don't think about it like that from Dolly Parton's perspective either. You don't look at it and go like, Dolly Parton is one of the top 5, 10 most successful songwriters in history, right? It's strange. So I was looking at Linda Ronstadt, and I was trying to compare Linda Ronstadt's fame for my wife, and I kind of went like, she's kind of like, she was sort of Madonna-ish at one point, right? Like, it's shocking to think there was this time where there was this window, and when that window was gone, you were gone. It was over, right? Because now it doesn't feel like that. It never feels like that with the way that our algorithms talk to us. It feels like, well, that person's still famous. And it's sort of even difficult to understand from an outside perspective for the rest of the world. Do people know about the things that you know about? Are you even speaking the same language about this stuff? So if you look at his body of work, dude, it's a shockingly comprehensive body of work.
And then if we didn't take, since you mentioned Madonna, if we didn't take Madonna or Eminem, and instead you brought up a third name, who would be another name that you'd want to talk about as far as songwriters?
I don't know that I'd want to talk about those people as songwriters. Who would I want to talk about in terms of of songwriting? Well, I think that there's a lot to be learned by going to the beginning of the source materials of the foundations of what becomes the canon, right? I keep saying Great American Songbook. There's a reason why. These songbooks, they were generated for years upon years with top line melodies, and they had all these standards inside of them, right? And maybe, your book might have 100, this book might have 500, 1,000, whatever the case might be, most of which were written by Tin Pan Alley guys or come out of theater. And if you look, you talk about things that people don't know. And this is specifically to songwriters. This is the best piece of advice I could ever give a songwriter. What worked then works right now.
Mm.
It works. You'll try to pull yourself apart to make that untrue. You'll say, well, there's this outlier and there's this thing. Okay, fine. That's fine. But exceptions rules don't make, right? Like why analyze that? Why analyze the perimeter? Why analyze the thing where one rocket went off one time, but usually it's just the night sky, right? You're going to ignore the entirety of the fact that these things, this formula, it reaches people. And what's your job, right? What's your job? Is your job to satisfy yourself with the notion that you were so innovative that you really appeased your own sense of self-worth? Or is your job for somebody to listen to something that you've done and go, that's what I was trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that. You know what I mean? If you're honest with yourself, every time that a piece of music ever reached you, either one of two things happened. One, the scene itself set the standard for what is being said. Or two, in the context of some song, somebody said something where you went, that's me, right? Like that's the big revelation. And that was already happening. That's been happening since the infancy of all of this, right? When all of this starts to form into what becomes like pop music. Learn your standards. Deconstruct the standards as often as possible, right? You will find you can use some little, tip and trick or something from those standards. And I guarantee you, the more that you listen to the standards, the more you'll go like, I can hear that in this song today. I can hear that in that song. That stuff always works. It's not an accident that every 10 years we get that vintage artist who comes along who people go, oh my God, they can sing and their music sounds like it did from the 50s or the 60s and they become the most famous person in the world. That's not an accident, right? People will always respond to that, overwhelmingly so, right? They'll always be shocked and baffled by the level of talent. They'll always be compelled by the trueness of a well-written song, right? That's every Bond song will be number one. There's a reason for that. They're reaching for that iconic classic standard, right? And so they allow themselves the reins to do it, and the public allows them to do it because they go, well, that's what you're supposed to do when it's a Bond song. And then everybody will love it. And the reason for that is because that music will always work better than anything else. It asks exactly the right question. How do I tell this story in completion and reach the most people possible? Right? They're asking themselves an even more vital question than that. What is true? Right? No, none of this BS about, well, how can I move the needle for myself? How can I prove to you that I'm an artistic genius? How can I issue my merit all over the place? Right? They're not asking that. They're asking what's true. And that's always the best question.
Want to play us out?
I can't.
I'll hit the pause button. But actually, before I go, because this was so impromptu, if you remember at the start, we like decided on this, and then 3 minutes later, just decided to do it. So I'm sure we didn't hit upon everything. Is there anything that we didn't hit upon that you would want to have included in this discussion? Anything like jumping to mind, big or small?
Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
I think that the most important thing is if you are a songwriter, a young songwriter particularly, but if you're a songwriter in general, and you know that you're good, and you've learned from the thing. Look, music is this wonderful, great equalizer because it doesn't matter if you're a guy who's made $1 million. It doesn't matter if you're an A-list artist. It doesn't matter if we're all at some point or another somebody in front of our stereo learning how to play a song, right? That's the great equalizer about music. We're all in that same position. We have to learn the thing, right? And then we said about our journey. In songwriting, there's a few things that you can do to get extremely good, and most of it is about the deconstruction of something for the reconstruction of it, right? It's not going to be everybody's route that they're going to teach themselves the bass part, how to this catalog and teach themselves, that's not for everybody. But I would say that in today's environment, be accustomed to the idea that when you say songwriter, what you actually mean is song maker. And your ability to create something in its most professional capacity is going to be synonymous with your ability to pay yourself, right? So in that way, yes, you are too a professional producer and you're a professional arranger and lots of these things, but you're a song maker. So the most simple way to say it, Anthony, is if a customer, client, person, networking, artist, whomever says, hey, I love this song and I want something that's like that. And this thing happened to me and I want to tell a story about that. The job is not just to sit on a flat top guitar, write that song, pitch it back to them. There was a time when that was the job. Absolutely. And for the longest time, that was the job. Now, the job is to bring that song to fruition. That's the job. So how do you begin to do that? I think the first thing that's necessary is that like it's obvious that you learn the stuff that you love, but you've got to learn the stuff that has been the most permanent, right? The most permanent. It's easy for people to pick apart catalogs of the uber famous, the Eagles, Aerosmith, Genesis. It's easy for people to pick apart these catalogs and then find all of these qualms by which to infuse into their catalogs. But ask yourself a very important question. Why do they work and why do they last? Why is it you can turn on any adult contemporary station in the world right now and Phil Collins is singing? What's going on with that? Right? For all of these people who supposedly dislike all of these, very super famous artists, boy, they sure do get played a lot. So somebody's listening and somebody's asking, right? So what's going on with that? Perhaps there's something a little bit deeper going on underneath the hood. Perhaps there's a language that's reaching into people that it's plainly stated. And maybe through that plain language, there's actually a multitude of stories being told. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to start to pick apart language and understand what's the nature of the cliche. When the cliche gets played on its head to mean two things, what's the nature of that? What is the double entendre? And not just in its most nefarious of ways, but what is the way to play the double entendre? If I have a metaphor in this song, how do I both speak to the metaphor throughout the entirety of the song while also making a point? What is the three-act structure? What's the hero's journey? What's the purpose of this? Why do we learn that, right? All of those things are crucial in songwriting. And the most famous of all songs will always include all of that I just said. Then from your musician perspective, it's just true, man. The better musician that you are, the better songs that you write. And that doesn't mean you have to make them as complex as possible. What you'll notice is the best musicians in history are masters of space. They're masters of space. The note they don't play will punch you in your face and throw you aback. It's the thing you wait to happen. The expectation that's subverted suddenly, right? It's where B.B. King stops the note. And the emptiness that you hang on to, that's what the blues means, right? That's where it lives. Space is where really good groove lives, right? There's a reason why all the soul guys are also the jazz guys, are also the R&B guys, are also the most capable guys, because there are guys who love to play in the groove and in this space. You can hear their decisions, right? When you start to write songs, learn about space. Learn about what space says as a lyrical device. Learn how what you're saying melodically is also what you're speaking lyrically, right? It's the same thing. Learn about the redundancies of it. Take on the challenge of the biggest catalogs of all time with their judgment cast aside and all of this to figure out, why is this true, right? Why is Fly Me to the Moon still featured in movies right now? How is that possible, right? Well, and if this is such a simple little tiny song and its meaning is so decipherable and easy to understand, then why does it still resonate? Well, perhaps there's a multitude of analogies that are happening in that song, right? And maybe the genius of the song itself is not just simplicity. Maybe the genius of the song itself is that depending on who's listening to it and depending on their familiarity with great standards, they're listening to different words with different meanings and different understandings. And a lot of that happens in country music way more than people are comfortable with realizing, right? Country music is made to be simple on this level, and it's made to have these layers that are underneath it. You need to look no further than Willie Nelson to establish that is true, right? There's a host of metaphor that's happening, and then the metaphor never stops. It plays it all the way through, which is a difficult game to play, right? If you're beginning now, don't go right to YouTube, right? I tell this to my kids all the time, man. I say YouTube is this amazing thing where I would have been able to learn everything and nothing all at once, right? Because there is no bigger weapon in your repertoire than your ear. None. You've got to sit in front of the music and learn the music. Do it until your hands do it right, and then do it again. And when you know the song front to back, then learn the bass player's part, right? Understand every single choice for why the thing works. That thing that you love, do it until you hate it, and then you'll love it in a way you never knew you could love it before, right? You'll love it for reasons that you don't even realize exist yet. Don't use YouTube. Don't use the tutorials. Don't use charts, and don't use any of that yet. Pull it apart for what it is. Get into it. Really dig it for what it is. Find all that stuff yourself, right? Do it again and again and again. And you have no other route than to be a great writer. That's the process. The process. If you learn the process of it, right? Because I can assure you of this, all that advice I just gave you was business advice. That's business advice. People don't think that. I have songwriters who reach out to me maybe once a day, right? At least once a day. And sometimes it's a ton, but at least once a day, somebody says, how do I write music for a living? And my answer usually comes across as condescending, and they hate it. I say, learn to write better music, right? They don't want to hear that. What they wanted to hear was, well, if you, here's my email list that I put together, and there's these section of clients who live on this forum, and they just can't wait to give you a bunch of money. And it's not that. That's not the job. The job is that you have to, the more that you learn about writing, and look, and again, I'm not saying that mine is a professional studio on Music Row and my productions are the caliber of quality of the $100,000 production. It's not about that. It's about the distinction between whether or not you write good music, right? Because a good song can beat a bad production, but a great production cannot save a bad song. That is the facts, right? All those songs from the 40s and the 50s and a lot of songs from the 60s, you really listen to them right now, they sound like they could be recorded on your iPhone. And you don't care. You don't care, man, because that's not the game. The game is the song good? And the answer is irrefutably yes. And in fact, you trust more that song is good. You trust it more because you know that the technology is less, right? And that's, they are you or me, are people sitting in front of something, just learning how to do the thing and beating their hands. If you want to be capable of making a living out of songwriting, the first game is learn how to write really, really good songs. You'll know if it's a good song because people will tell you. If they tell you that they don't get it and they tell you that they don't like it, be honest with yourself. 99.9% of every single songwriter I ever met in my life, when confronted with the idea that the song they wrote's not any good, goes, well, you just don't get it. Right? And hey, some people like this and some people like that. That's true. But if 3 people out of 3 people tell you that the thing's not very good, or they go, I don't understand, or what's the purpose of this, or what are we doing? Or, be honest with yourself. If something needs more time, it needs more time. It's fine, right? The difference between the professional songwriter and the amateur songwriter is editing. That's the difference. The difference is in the edit. The difference is not in the ability to do it right the first time. First time what? You didn't earn that, right? Yes, inspiration does strike. Yes, inspirational moments do happen. That's fine. That's why they make good stories. They shouldn't be every single time. Everything you said the first time doesn't make it true, right? And it doesn't make it right. Then the next step is to put yourself into situations where you can write with other people, right? And know whether or not those people actually have the credibility to be telling you when a line is good and bad or indifferent, right? Then that's at the point where you start, once you've intersected with those worlds enough, then you can start to take people's money. I'm not one of these who thinks you should take people's money in real time to learn on the job. No, that is not the way that this works, right? You've got to be at the point where you can impact people. You got to be at the point where you can humble yourself and learn, even when you don't necessarily like the thing that person is teaching you, right? The person who's done it before. And by the way, those resources are easy to find. They're out there, right? Some of them cost money. A lot of these number one hit songwriters, they have websites right now where you can go and they'll say, I'll write you a song. I'll write a song with you. I'll teach you how to write a song, right? Because a lot of those guys, that's how they supplement their income, right? Do it. Scrounge the money up and do it. That resource didn't exist when I was young, right? I'd have blown everything. I'd have played gigs just to do that. You know what I mean? Because they're going to say things that are going to change your world. And the last thing you want to do is disagree with them about it. They've proven it. They've proven it. There's nothing to disagree with, right? Once you're at that point and you've sort of learned about the combination of production and arrangement, what chord structures do, what the purpose of them is, how you can write a song, how you can write a song that's underneath that song, what that even means, you start to get this understanding with other professional songwriters. What is dualism in music? What is the dual narrative songwriting technique? What is, which by the way is a very exclusive technique and only some people use. I'm of a very thin lineage left, right? But once you're at that point, your songs will be good enough that when you go to these third party environments and you offer your services and stuff, something about the way that your stuff hits will resonate with people differently. You can tell the difference between a person who can navigate through a professional song confidently and not. You can tell an amateur from not. And it doesn't matter what plugins you have, man. It doesn't matter if you spend $1,000 on plugins that sound like all the other hit songs in the world. If you don't know what you're doing, that will be obvious, just as it will be obvious if you do know what you're doing. And there might not be words for it, but the clients will follow, right? It all begins with sitting down and learning the fundamentals. The same advice that your high school basketball coach would give you when it comes to, hey, you've got a ton of talent as a basketball player. I sure wish that you knew where to put your hands. I sure wish you knew how to play defense better. Right? I don't understand why you're watching the ball when you should be watching the guy's hips. I don't get it. Right? And you learn fundamentals and you start to see the things, right? And as those fundamentals grow, it amplifies all of the other creative parts to it, right? The parts that wow people, right? That's where you should start. And every guy that I know that has been successful at this in some way, shape, or form, right? Even if they don't do it for a living, they would tell you the same thing, particularly if they're musicians. Okay.
Attaboy. You did it. You did it. 35 seconds or less. You stuck to it.
That's true.
This time I didn't give you a time frame, which I know you like the time frames, but that was beautiful.
And by like it, you mean I'd rather light myself on fire in real time in front of a crowd of people, perhaps exactly. to a tune.
Precisely. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to hit the pause button and give you a chance to play us out. But thanks. This was super impromptu today, and I'm glad we both actually managed to find an hour or so at the same time. It's pretty rare for us.
You know what? And I think throughout the entirety of the course of this conversation, we never once said the words or the letters AI, which is very strange. That's a whole different show to do. And it's
that might be part two.
Yeah, well,
but obviously there's a lot we didn't touch upon. But
that's a big important conversation for people right now. They should be thinking about it and they should be having it.
I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did.
Absolutely, brother.
And it's good to see you.
And now, on to me.
Here we go.